This panel's title is Emerging Scholarship on Christian Zionism, and our first panelist is the Reverend Anne Heikkinen, and she'll take it from here.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank you, the organizers of this consultation, for the opportunity to present my research in this session. I don't know if some of you have ever been in the situation where you are researching a person who is very much alive and active, and this person is listening what you have to say about his thought. I have that privilege today as Bishop Munib is here. In this presentation, I focused on Yunan's theology on Christian witness that he refers the theology of martyria. I addressed a few different perspectives on his thinking that are connected to the theme of witnessing, and these are theology of martyria, forming Palestinian contextualized theology, and witness in Palestinian context. Munib Yunan, as we know, is a Palestinian Lutheran bishop who retired in 2018. He also served as the president for Lutheran World Federation from 2010 until 2017. He has been awarded with multiple global peace prizes. As a church leader, he has had an impact in both local and global church statements and policies and in interfaith dialogue. Simultaneously, he has been part of forming Palestinian theology that has been on the rise since 1980s. Martyria, the witness, is a recurring theme in Yunan's thought throughout his career. Themes of witness and martyrdom are also a traditional part of Christianity, initially connected to the history of early Christians who were persecuted by Roman Empire and killed for their spiritual conviction and opposition of the empire. However, initially, martyrdom or martyria does not refer to dying or being killed as an innocent, but to witness and living up one's life for a certain cause. Interestingly, this classic concept of martyrdom rose to the theological discourse in the 1960s with the rise of contextual theologies with prominent public voices. In the context of Global South, especially in Latin America, concept of martyrdom got new dimensions. When traditionally Christians had suffered and been killed because of their faith and quest for religious freedom, a new kind of persecution happened in different circumstances, as Christians were defending the marginalized people of their societies, ruled by also Christians. In its new interpretation, Christian witness was not only standing for faith itself or certain theological tenets, but defending suffering people. One can see similarities in this contextual interpretation and in the thought of Yunan. Though Yunan is not living under the Christian government, as many Latin American liberation theologians who have been part of the tradition of the new martyria, Yunan still interprets the concept of witness vastly, without being strictly defensive on his Christian identity, at least when it comes to verbal witness. Yunan himself criticizes Western evangelicals for focusing on proclaiming the gospel with words only. Most of Yunan's work, whether it was in his congregational work, local or global ecumenism, religious dialogue, or even when contextualizing Christianity to Palestinians living under occupation and tumultuous contemporary context, is rooted in his aim to provide a Christian witness. Palestinian theology rose prominently to the theological discourse in 1980s. Even though there had been some earlier statements that rose from the similar experiences and circumstances, 1980s can be seen as the main era of developing the Palestinian theological interpretations. Dr. Elisabeth Martejin has called this phenomenon a revival of Palestinian Christianity. Especially during the First Intifada, Palestinian Christian theologians became involved with this theological societal activism parallelly with their society and started to form local liberative theological approach. Yunan's reflections on Palestinian Christian identity and the contextualization of theology in 1980s and 1990s are parallel with the rise of Palestinian theological interpretations. His early reflections of Palestinian Christian national identity, theology, and witness can be seen as inherently connected to the general developments of Palestinian theology. According to Yunan, providing witness is a task of every Christian, but it includes different elements depending on the context. Hence, in Palestine, part of witness is to embrace one's Palestinian national identity. This is done by forming a contextualized theology that takes a Palestinian lived reality into account and reaches the real needs inside the Palestinian communities, both theologically and in practice. Yunan describes the position of Palestinian Christians in the region both a privilege to live where Jesus lived and acted, and to be continuum of the early church, and a challenge to exist as a minority, live in a Palestinian society, and in a politically tense area. For these reasons, it is important to ask how Palestinian Christian witness can be effective and to face contemporary issues, problems, and challenges of the society. When Yunan introduces the Palestinian Christian identity, he states that many Western people would like to form a dichotomy between Christian and Palestinian. Yunan says he does not want to prioritize one side of his identity over the other, since it would lead to complex identity dilemma. On one hand, saying he's first a Christian would separate him from the society and indicate that he is in a superior position compared to others. On the other hand, putting the Palestinian identity first would lead to mere nationalism and secularism, and this, according to Yunan, would not represent the true Palestinian identity in its inclusiveness. Palestinian and Christian are categories that live simultaneously, like the natures of Christ, divine and human, lived in him in his incarnation. Yunan says, "My Christianity incarnates in my Palestinianity and makes thus forming one identity in me." As Yunan emphasized the importance of strong national identity, he also describes how Christians must simultaneously work as bridge builders and break down the barriers that separate nations from each other. The task is binomial. It includes being a good patriot and serving as a bridge builder in mediating conflict. Yunan tells how in his church people feel like part of nation, both in its sufferings and its hopes. Even living under occupation has not stopped the way of being objective and seeking for the better self-determination for the people. Yunan says how, I quote, "Our call has always been a call for justice and human rights. Our witness has always been a witness of coexistence of the three religions and the two nations. We raise our voice as the voiceless. We still raise our voice to justice and coexistence from our call. This is our witness." Martyrium and martyrs are a central theme in Palestinian culture and society, especially in the context of prolonged conflict, Israeli occupation, and state violence. One can see Yunan's theology of martyrium as an aim to form a constructive interpretation of martyrdom, a central concept in the Palestinian culture and society. In his conceptualization, martyrdom is non-violent but not passive, meaning it does not settle for a simple role of the victim. As a church leader, Yunan has advocated for a role of Palestinian Christians in the society. According to him, Christians in the Middle East are not the victims that Western Christians sometimes would like to perceive them as, nor they are dhimmis within majority Muslim society. Yunan connects martyria of the early church and the witness of Palestinian Christian community to the minority position in the society. Just like early Christians, who many times were martyred for their faith, Palestinian Christians are also numeral minority in their society. However, Yunan also counters the stereotypes, often inducted by the West, of Palestinian Christians being victims or persecuted by Muslims. Palestinian Christians' witness and the suffering it includes does not reflect the religious persecution, but the tumultuous political reality of Palestine and Israel, and the Palestinians' decision to stay on their homeland. Yunan's views on Christians' position as a minority are contradictory. On one hand, he describes how the minority position of Palestinian Christians reminds of early Christians and their witness, and how their church is the weakest church in the world. On the other hand, Yunan denounces the minority position altogether when he writes in 2017, and I quote, "Today we also hear voices speaking again about religious minorities in the Arab world. On behalf of Arab Christians, I want to say that we will never accept to be a minority on the soil where we have walked, and in the motherland which our own arms have built for 2,000 years. Arab Christians will never accept to be a minority, even if we are few in number. We do not think ourselves as a minority in the society, nor do we have a minority complex. How can I be called a minority, as if my citizenship is suspect because of my faith?" End of quote. Yunan emphasized the role of Christians in at least two separate ways: spiritual and societal. These spiritual and societal perspectives are not dichotomic, but present a twofold argumentation for the significance of Palestinian Christians' presence. Question of this presence is topical since the emigration of Palestinian Christians during the last few decades. According to Yunan and many other Palestinian theologians, when living under occupation and oppression, staying on the Holy Land is a robust witness itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I didn't introduce, actually give you a little bit more information about Reverend Heikkinen. She's an ordained minister with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland and is studying at the University of Helsinki, working on her dissertation about Bishop Munib Yunan, a Palestinian church leader and former president of the Lutheran World Federation. Our next panelist is the Reverend Samuel Mall. Reverend Mall is the assistant professor at Bishop's College, Kolkata. His doctoral work focuses on subaltern communities oppressed by Christian nationalism and building a collective voice to challenge its hegemony.
I really thank the organizers for extending me this invitation to be part of this very important gathering and also to engage with Christian Zionism at the baptismal site. When my mother came to know about it, she told me, please go with faith and pray. So I did pray. I told that when we went to the baptismal site, we also sang songs. She was quite happy. I did a poll in the college that I teach amongst the graduate students last year in August. I asked them whom they supported, Israel or Palestine. Students are very smart. They will change their answers according to the person who asks these questions. And since they know that I have researched in Christian Zionism, their answers would have been influenced. However, I asked them at the very last moment, through their class representatives, through a WhatsApp poll. And the answers that came out were shocking and but predictable. Both Palestine and Israel got the same answers. However, students opting for neutrality or those who did not know what to answer remained the majority. In other words, Israel got 61% votes and Palestine 29%. If this is the situation in a theological college, we can imagine the position of normal church-going people. I can't entirely blame the students because our theological colleges and universities have nothing to offer on Palestinian liberation theology. Libraries lack books, and teaching is influenced by a liberal Zionism. To get an entry point into Zionism, my work focuses on intersecting Dalit and Palestinian experiences of religious nationalism and to explore how Palestinian and Dalit experience intersects with each other. The Britishers left India and Palestine almost at the same time. India gained independence in 1947, Palestine was partitioned in 1948. What accompanied India's independence was the partition of India and Pakistan, and it was based on religion. My own grandmother's family was separated during the partition, and I heard stories from her on how people were killed just based on their religion. And it's here that I want to discuss the Hindutva plan of nation, in which religious identity defines the character of nation state as it is more important than democracy and human rights. However, India adopted a secular outlook in the constitution, and this secular outlook didn't have much effect of Hindu nationalism, even though it was sidelined in the adoption of the new constitution. Its proponents kept promoting this ideology. They worked to develop structures and institutions that promoted this ideology. And we can see that this ideology is more visible now as the political party that seeks to realize the vision of Hindu religious nation has won successive elections with clear majority. The religion that Hindutva ascribes is the religion of the elites or the upper caste. They object to the plurality of religions and see their presence as a threat. Hence, the outcast in Indian social structure, the Dalits, have no place in it. Religion of Christianity, Islam have no place as these are foreign religions, and I will later explain why. India adopted a secular outlook in its constitution and granted provisions for those who were downtrodden. And this was against the plans or the ideals of Hindu nationalism. Therefore, Hindu nationalism only aims at fighting secular notions of society, but also includes in its ambit a political strategy that seeks to unite Hindus in resisting religions that do not originate in India. And therefore, there is a double catastrophe that is produced by Hindutva as it marginalizes the Dalits and discriminates against the religious minorities. And I have placed them because most of the things that they go through are similar. When we come to Zionism, Zionism is also a system of accumulation of power, land, ideological legitimacy, and displacement of people and other ideas. And this definition I borrow from Edward Said. Zionism was a movement of the establishment of Jewish state in Palestine, and after the establishment of Israel, it refers to the protection of the state of Israel. Zionism has another form which is older than political Zionism. It's called the Christian Zionism. So in my work, I actually start from Zionism, not from Christian Zionism, what Dr. Muntar was talking about yesterday. And I have various reasons for it. Because Christian Zionism is already held to be a legitimate theology, which normal church-going people, seminarians, and also teachers and bishops, many of them, they follow. And therefore, when we place Christian Zionism in the context of political Zionism, it is there that we can challenge the illegitimacy of it. So I approach Christian Zionism as part of larger Jewish political Zionism because Christian Zionism is considered to be legitimate for Indian Christians. It is only when you locate it in the larger framework of political Zionism one can expose the illegitimacy of it. We can point out that Zionism not only focuses on the discrimination of Palestinian Arabs, but Palestinian Christians as well. And when I was discussing this with a gathering of lay leaders, so they commented, we never knew that there were Christians in Palestine. And therefore, the proponents of the ideology of Hindutva use Hindu scriptures to assert that India has always been a Hindu nation, and the maintenance of caste system becomes very important for it. The proponents of Hindutva point out that only Hindus are the citizens of India because they share bonds of common blood and their common origin. The ideologues of Hindutva were very inspired with the Zionist movement. The proponent Sarwarkar goes on to say that it is only Hindus and Jews that can justly claim to be recognized as a racial unit. They wanted to build partnership with the Zionist movement. Hindutva stresses that Hindu is the one who sees India as fatherland and holy land. That means a Hindu is the one who should be born in India, because by the virtue of being born in India, his or her holy places are within India. So that is the one condition that makes a person a Hindu and a citizen of India. Therefore, the essentials of Hindutva are common nation, common race, and common civilization. For establishing a Hindu nation, maintenance of caste system becomes important to maintain the purity of Hindu race. The political Zionists also use the Hebrew Bible, and Christians use the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament to construct myths that are divinely justify the colonization of Palestine. The religious language, theology, and myths of the Hebrew Bible are used to form an ethnocentric nationalist myth that provide the Jews with title deed to claim the land as a divine right. The concept of promised land, chosen people, was used to attract Jews to the Zionist cause and provide divine justification for the Zionist project. Zionists selectively picked up on such texts and developed the understanding of an aggressive and merciless God. They used Hebrew Bible to demonize and ethically cleanse Palestinians. Zionism aims at the maintenance of Jewish supremacy. So you see that almost both of them, when we intersect them, the experience of Dalits and Palestinians are almost similar. But religious nationalism does not operate on its own. It needs an ally, and this ally is in terms of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism and religious nationalism have similar ideologies. In the neoliberal context, life becomes unpredictable. This creates a vacuum in the life of those who are oppressed, and they seek anchor in religion. It is here that religious nationalism taps into the security of the poor and the marginalized and aligns them into their ideology. Those who are discriminated are taken into this structure of oppression by concealing the oppressive strategies behind neoliberalism. In other words, the target group of the oppressor is absorbed into the world of oppressor, and thereby carrying out oppression becomes an easy task. Both Hindutva and neoliberalism are individualistic, where winners are worshipped. In Hindutva, Brahmin or the higher caste is the most competitive one, where Dalit is the opposite. Both Hindutva and neoliberalism are not interested in equality. For neoliberalism, liberty comes with the purchasing power, and because Hindutva focuses on oppressing religious minority and Dalits, liberty is reserved for the high caste. Hindutva has successfully camouflaged itself behind the neoliberal order to fulfill its agenda. The Zionist state of Israel uses security and its armed dealings in a globalized world to conceal its violent strategies against Palestinians. Israel has become a major player in the arms industry and security strategies, and Palestinians become a testing laboratory for the Zionist government. What's going on in Gaza is a genocide, as the focus is to occupy land and eliminate the Palestinians. The Zionist religious nationalism keeps elevating the aspect of security by using the language of victimization. This helps them to disguise their aggression as self-defense. Building on the language of security, Israel has become a major player in exporting arms. Both these ideologies are similar to each other. They are fascist in nature because both ideologies are a phenomenon of a majority with minority consciousness. And it builds on the consciousness of being privileged and oppressed at the same time. It is through such contradictions that hegemony is constructed. To construct an hegemony, you need contradictions. You need the same people to talk contradicting views about the same thing. And it is in these contradictions that you have hegemony that is constructed. The suffering of Palestinian and Dalits intersect each other as these ideologies have constructed a struggle between the good and the evil. The high caste and the Jews are considered to be goods. Dalits and Palestinians are categorized as evil. Such categorization justifies the violence against both communities. Therefore, critique of both these hegemonic nationalism has to be accompanied by a defense of social justice from the perspective of the marginalized, the Palestinian and Dalits. Therefore, social justice becomes an extremely significant in resisting Zionism and Hindutva, as justice is a virtue that does not concern the marginalized alone, but the whole society. Social justice is a theological action. It is with the perspective of social justice that Jesus questioned the religious nationalism of his own Jewish community that envisioned the Messiah as a warrior king who would destroy and overthrow Roman Empire. The idea of vengeance against the Gentiles was also inherent in the Jewish understanding of God's kingdom. Opposing Jewish religious nationalism, the proclamation of God's kingdom by Jesus, its inclusive character was stressed as it included believing Jews and Gentiles. What goes unnoticed in both this religious nationalism is the material base on which they build and sustain their hegemony. This material base is dependent on neoliberalism. For long, materialism has not developed into an investigative category in the study of religion and religious experiences. We have to analyze oppression that results from religious nationalism of Zionism and Hindutva as a set of material, unequal economic relationships. Analyzing Zionism and Hindutva materialistically will lead to a better understanding of social and material relations. Imperial characteristics of Roman Empire were significant in confluence of political and religious concerns during Jesus' time. Both politics and religion, that is temple and the high priest, worked together to support the colonial process through economic exploitation. Peasant families were forced into escalating debts to pay taxes and support themselves. This material base was significant for Jesus' resistance to the Roman Empire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is the Reverend Dr. Crystal Silva McClintock. She is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ and visiting assistant professor of evangelism and missions at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Austin, Texas. Her research focuses on imperialism and colonialism in Euro-American Christian missions and the growth of Christian Zionism in Latina communities.
Hello, friends. First, I want to say thank you, echo the thank yous that the opportunity to be here for Dr. Mitri Rahab and Dr. Robert Smith, whose work has been indispensable and kindness to me as a mentor. Thank you so much. And to Dr. Malengthan, I want to say thank you. I didn't get an opportunity to thank you for your work and your contribution today, keeping us mindful that just because there are white women in Christian Zionist spaces doesn't mean that this is liberatory. So I really appreciate your work on that and bringing that to this space. I also want to say that, thank you for putting up the slides because I almost forgot, but I want to share context about who I am in a minute, but I want to say that we have to challenge the academic boundaries that are often colonialist structures. Right? We are not compartmentalized human beings. We are here essentially to tell the truth. And so as a Christian, that's why I'm here. I'm here to tell the truth. And this work is not separate from what I do in the church and what I do in the seminary and what I do as a mommy and in my home. And so I hope that we're mindful of that because we're also doing a lot of emotional work. As we do this work, we're talking about extreme violence and the worst of humanity. And so may we bring the best of humanity in this work, and may we put it into praxis. So what brings me to this work is that I'm a child of Mexican immigrants. My mom and her mom and brothers and sisters crossed the border. The southern border, if you don't know that southern border, think of the wall in Palestine. I grew up seeing that wall. It was not a barrier to me because I am a white Latina. I have privilege on that racial hierarchy that was brought by Europeans to what we now know as Latin America. And so I want to recognize also that I come from the land of the Coahuiltecan people, the Lipa and Apache, the Tonkawa, because I bring them to this work too. They are not where I descend from. But if I am going to talk about land back for the Palestinians, which is why I do this work as a comrade to the Palestinians, then I must bring those people and their voices with me to be authentic and to tell the truth about the land that was stolen from them. And so that is in part to do Christian repair, because I am a settler. And so I bring my mom and my grandma to this work. And to all immigrants who cross that southern border in the US, when they see that wall, I hope that the immigrants that cross over into the US, that all these Christian Zionist organizations are coming after, which I'm going to explain to you in a minute, they're coming after because they want them to be Christian Zionists too. Not just so they can believe something, but so they can take those beliefs to vote and to spend their money and to take trips. So using Dr. Mitri Rahab's image is they're doing the software and the hardware with the communities that I come from and that my family comes from. And so this work is to say to my own communities, I want you to be free from heresy and from theologies of violence, and I want you to see yourself in the people of Palestine. That is my context. The walls look the same. On your bottom right, también de este lado hay sueños. On this side, there are dreams too. The art on the wall in Palestine, the wall on the art at the southern border tell you the story, which is the truth, the basic truth, that there is an oppressor and there is an oppressed people. And there is nothing that can be argued about that. I've done a training for the Workers' Defense Project in Austin, Texas, which are largely immigrant men, not exclusively men, but immigrants from all over Latin America. And when I showed them pictures of the wall in Bethlehem, they saw themselves there. They made the connections. I didn't need to. They had the wisdom. They have the life experience to know. And so I think that it's not always successful, but we have to help people get an entry point into seeing their own struggles. So this struggle is intersectional. And the struggle is decolonial, and that means we decolonize ourselves. I am on that journey myself. But we must decolonize what is within us. I want to tell you a quick story about Rosa. When I did my dissertation, which I'm hoping to publish into a book on this topic, Rosa was obviously not her real name, but in an interview to understand, tell me about your Christian Zionist commitments as a Latina. Because Dr. Smith's work really illustrated well for all of us, but for me especially, is that a common theme is whiteness. It's not even Christianity, it's whiteness rooted in US exceptionalism. So race is always already present in Christian Zionism because European, Euro-American missionaries exported it all over Latin America, and not only Latin America, and they continue to do so. And so what I want to share with you is that in these interviews, I did not ask her about US exceptionalism. I did not ask her about her immigration status, but she brought it up. And she said, you know what, I sinned because I came into this country undocumented. And I said, can you say more about that? Tell me about that. And she said, esta es la casa de los anglos. This is the house of the white people, and I am a guest here. And she was not kidding. She had internalized racism. But she is telling us what we've been saying that the literature tells us, is that she knew that the US is for white people. So it is about race, actually. And what she also said is that if she supported Israel, that God was going to forgive her, and God was going to help her get her immigration status the right way. She took me around the church after our interview, where she served for free, doing a lot of the work that the pastors tasked her with. And she said, I want to show you the church. And the church wasn't this huge fancy church. It was very nice. But she said, I want you to know that God provided us this because we support Israel. How? I said, by voting, she said, by sending money, by prayer. Nights to honor Israel. When the children come out of their Sunday school classes, they kiss the flag of Israel. They kiss it so that little children are learning this. And she said, and God blessed us because we bless Israel. And it is this, she said, is not just so our community, the Latino community, can survive. It is so we can thrive. And so I want you to really, I want to impress that on you and on all of us, because we think of people in prosperity gospel often with wanting Mercedes and all this massive wealth. That is not what she wanted. And that is not what she described. So what I want to say is that we're all responsible for what we believe, but Christian Zionist organizations are taking people like her with a lot of vulnerabilities and who don't have a lot of power in social structures and giving them the Genesis 12:3 and saying, you're going to be blessed if you do this. And she's imagining that if she supports Israel, her life will be transformed. And not just that, she said, countries in Latin America would be transformed. If they all supported Israel, they would be transformed. Their governments would function better. Their economies would function better. A whole separate conversation, but that's American imperialism is why those things happen. But she doesn't know that because she has to work every day of her life just to survive. And so just a little bit about her story that I want us to be mindful of. She is not the only Latina Christian Zionist. Latina community is not a monolith, and neither are Latina Christian Zionists. Okay? But she's one story that I think we need to keep in mind because she is vulnerable. She is extra vulnerable to the predatory Christian Zionist organizations that are preying on people's vulnerabilities like her. Okay, and that might include pastors in these churches who have a lot of money and who are getting free trips to go to Israel, the occupied territory. So this is something that we really need to keep in mind. I just want to, again, reiterate that whiteness is part of it. Because we cannot separate the reality that even though someone in an earlier presentation said genocide is not who people are, but it is the history of the United States, right? And indigenous people have been telling us that in the US for a long time, in the US, which is Turtle Island, that genocide has been part of this story, always. So genocide is part of the story of Christian Zionism, because the people that built it and had those early mythologies about what the US were part of the genocidal acts against indigenous people. So it is, at least in part, what Christian Zionism is. It's part of a history of genocide. And we cannot separate that, and that's why it's so denied in the US. I do want to note that Protestant and Catholics in Latina communities can have these Christian Zionist commitments. In the research that I did, the interviews, qualitative study, eschatology was present, but not a primary factor. What kept surfacing was US civil religion, and I would translate that, show you a chart in a minute, about proximity to whiteness. So the Latina community is always navigating, they're not the only community who have to do this, their proximity to whiteness, especially in the US, but that's exported. That's exported everywhere, and particularly if you're not aware, all over Latin America, that racial hierarchy exists. There's a lot of anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, and white Latinos are at the top. Just watch a soap opera and you'll see. You're like, are these white people? Yes, they are, and they're speaking Spanish because the racial hierarchy privileges blonde, green eyes, and they're all on the soap operas. And guess who's cleaning the homes in those soap operas? Indigenous people. So race cannot be removed from this, and especially because Latina people in the US who cross the border, they're not the only border crossers. I want to be mindful as well that there are people now all over the globe crossing this southern border, but primarily that's how it's always been. And when they cross, they have to navigate whiteness. They have to navigate whiteness, and they're adopting Christian Zionism in part, and the way their Christian Zionism looks is because of whiteness. So it has to do with civil religion. Is it really their Christianity? Maybe. But what they have been given by Christian Zionist organizations in the US and their history of Christian missions to Latin America, absolutely. They've been given US civil religion. They've been given Christianity really colored with US imperialism. And that's actually in mission records, okay? So that's not something that I've been told I'm making up. I can show you the mission records where there's actually from the Verbo Church principles to teach people to favor the US and to speak fondly and positively about the US, particularly during the Cold War. So we cannot separate this at all. So whiteness being white, and this chart shows that the more that the Christian Zionists that are from the Latina community accept and adopt Christian nationalist perspectives, the closer they are to whiteness. And the further they get, it becomes more of a philo-Semitism, because there were also people I interviewed who were like, no, the US, because of their eschatology, they said the US isn't even mentioned in the end times narrative in the Bible, and the US isn't great. We don't think so. That's not what we're about. And so the less they were tethered to American US nationalist narratives, the more philo-Semitic they were, right? And voting and all these other things is much more of a spiritual type of thing that just appeared. And I do want to say that in the literature in Portuguese, and there's some in Spanish, but really there's not a lot about Latina Christian Zionism, particularly in the US. So my hope is to fill some of that lacuna, but I'm creating literature. So a lot of this is theory, because there is nothing that I was asked my advisor. I was like, well, how about this? So I did interviews, I did research, but this is common for Christian Zionists, I think, across the spectrum, right? This verse. But again, I want to reiterate, this is about material needs being met, getting out of marginalization, climbing the societal ladder. This is not just, oh, I want a Mercedes or a big mansion. So we need to not always allow that stereotype to box us in when we're thinking about what prosperity means, particularly for people on the margins. So the other thing is that plain sense of scripture that comes from the Reformation that is very present, exported again by missionaries, because first, Latin America was Catholic. So you don't have necessarily this literalist plain sense of scripture that you have as much in Protestantism. So this is exported by Protestant missionaries. That doesn't mean that there aren't autochthonous expressions of Christian Zionism, but I think we really have to remember that it's tethered to Euro-American missions and the influence of the US, which, by the way, also sent CIAs disguised as missionaries and vice versa. So we have to remember that, and that was to spread US propaganda. Okay, so pilgrimage is very important. People I interviewed cried when they talked about their trips. They want to bring more pastors. These organizations are really trying to recruit and grow. The Latino Coalition for Israel is one, but it's started by Pastor Mario Bramnick. If you research this topic at all, his name is everywhere. He's like in every organization. He's not just here, but this is one started by Latina community. Christians United for Israel started Kufay en Español, nights to honor Israel in Spanish all over the country, Noches para honrar a Israel. They have a radio program in Spanish. They have a Spanish-speaking church. They're really trying to grow. One thing that they're telling people is, hey, you come from Sephardic Judaism, and then to build on Christian Zionism, Islamophobic tropes, they say, we have family values like Jews, is what they tell them. As if Arabs and Muslims do not, is the implication, right? And then they're saying you're Sephardic Jews, you come from Sephardic Judaism. This is a common theme. This is also in the Philos Project, which has now started Philos Latino. Jesse Rojo, a former gang member, Dominican, had a powerful conversion experience. He's now studying what Hebraic studies is what he calls, making a lot of connections between his home country and the occupied territories, modern state of Israel, and just remembering that all of this is equating the modern state, as we've already talked about, with biblical Israel, which I think really needs to be complicated. Doing things in Guatemala, which is one of the countries in Latin America that has supported Israel since its founding. And we won't have time, I'm going to run out of time, but I want to reiterate that if you look at this history, there's a history of anti-indigeneity, that when the state was being formed in 1948, the year before, they appealed to Guatemala and they said, listen, the way you're indigenizing, or civilizing the indigenous population in Guatemala, the Mayans that were experiencing genocide, that's what we're doing over here. And that was one of the selling points. That is in the historical record. So there's anti-indigeneity embedded in this Christian Zionism as a very colonial project that we have to remember. And to this day, the parties that support Israel, political parties, the most in Guatemala, continue to deny the genocide of the indigenous Mayan people, which is well documented. So that's an important thread in Christian Zionism, I would say, across Latin America, because there is so much anti-indigeneity that far-right movements support and align themselves with Christian Zionism. This was before the genocide started. Israel is a Hispanic opportunity. This is a Zionist publication. And so Latinos are most ignored, but not by everybody. This is intentional. And the organizations I showed you, like Philos, is connected to Tikva, which is Zionist and gets money from Israel. So all of these things are connected. And what is also connected to keep in mind is that Christian Zionism in Latina communities in the US have a reciprocal and circular relationship with countries in Latin America. So you have to think about it as circular and reciprocal. So what happens in the US and Spanish-speaking Christian communities is tethered to their home countries, okay? Because Philos Latino is all over Latin America, meeting with heads of state and having radio programs. Okay, so these are just some ideas. My time is up, but I think complicating, centering Palestinian voices, Palestinian stories, normalizing what is the truth in our communities, the Latina communities, because these beliefs have real consequences on the ground for our Palestinian siblings. Thank you.